It's a great pleasure to have with us today Dr. Amit Patki. Dr. Amit Patki is the medical director of the Fertility Associates Center of Assisted Reproduction in Mumbai, India. He was formerly the medical director, Regenesis, Center for Assisted Reproduction, Endoscopy, and Fetal Medicine in Mumbai. He is an honorary associate professor at the Samoa Medical College, Hospital and Research Center in Mumbai. He is also a consultant of obstetric and gynecology at Hujuria Surgical Healthcare and Soraya Mother and Child Care at Mumbai. He has over 35 scientific publications and several book chapters, and he is the editor of 3 books. He has won several awards at national and international level. The topic of his lecture is the clinical aspects of the various progesterone formulation, which is coming just after the lecture of Professor Christian Egerter on the mode of action of the progesterone. Amit, please.
It's been over 40 years since the world's first test tube baby, Louis Brown, was born. And in the last 40 years, IVF specialists all over the world have strived to improve their success rate. Newer drugs for ovulation induction and the ability to have good culture media to ensure a blastocyst in the lab have helped us to have a good take-home baby weight. The process of ICSI has truly revolutionized male factor infertility. Various other technologies and modalities like the laser-assisted hatching, PGD, PGS, and cryopreservation technologies have helped us to tide over complications of IVF. However, in the last 10 years, infertility centers have stagnated at their success rate, their ongoing pregnancy rate, and their take-home baby rate. And all of them know that the biggest eye-opener is the implantation state. We can all grow a normal euploid blastocyst in the lab, but we would never know which embryo would implant. Causes of implantation failure are many, but most of them could be divided into 4 main groups. Problems associated with the embryo and problems associated with the receptivity of the endometrium, mainly the luteal phase insufficiencies and the ability of the endometrium to immunomodulate to accept the foreign embryo. There's a very old Zen saying that says, we teach the best of things, we want to learn more. And me and my colleagues over the last 15 years have looked at progesterone, which we think is the missing link in this jargon to achieve a good implantation rate. So ladies and gentlemen, today I'll be speaking on the different clinical results of various progestogen formulations. Now, when you look at maintenance of early pregnancy, it is a combined orchestrated effort of various hormones, interleukins, and cytokines. But amongst the hormones, we know it is the progesterone hormone, which is the team leader, which orchestrates these various different mechanisms to ensure that the embryo is firmly embedded in the endometrium and a pregnancy is maintained. There are various reasons for luteal phase defects, and to come down to ART cycle, we know that the oral ovulogens, namely the clomiphene citrate itself, is anti-estrogenic to endometrium, produces reduced endometrial progesterone receptor production. Further, in ART, whether we are using the long traditional GnRS agonist downregulation or even the use of antagonist causes severe luteal phase insufficiency. The supraphysiological levels of estradiol themselves are leutolytic, and the process of oocyte retrieval, mainly the multiple punctures on the follicle, cause damage to the granulosa cell, and this all makes it very necessary for us to supplement progesterone in the luteal phase to ensure adequate implantation. We also know that the progesterone is important for early embryonic development, and progesterone deficiency is responsible not only for implantation failures, but early miscarriages and unsuccessful ART. As I said before, the process of ART, COH, and the protocols creates an iatrogenically low progesterone environment. And hence, there is no doubt that the luteal phase needs to be supported. And there have been studies which have tried to not give any luteal phase support with abysmal results, and these trials early on had to be discontinued. So it is a very common practice for the last maybe 40 years or more to supplement progesterone in the luteal phase, because this improves IVF cycles. But progesterone, in addition to its hormonal effect of causing secretory phase in the endometrium, also stimulates the production of progesterone-induced blocking factor, the PIPF, and this induces via the cytokines T helper type 2 response, which immunomodulates the endometrium to accept the embryo and ensure a firm implantation. So progesterone in my mind has two functions, the hormonal function and the immunomodulatory function. When we talk of implantation failure, it is the luteal phase progesterone deficiency being one of the most common reasons for implantation failure. It affects with the secretory transformation of the endometrium, and implantation failure will upregulate the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is a risk factor which makes the endometrium non-responsive or non-conducive to implantation. The pro-inflammatory factors being the cytokines and the tumor necrosis factor alpha. It also downregulates the anti-inflammatory cytokines, which is the interleukins 4, 6, and 10. Various other hormones have been tried for luteal phase support. For example, the HCG, the human chorionic gonadotropin injection, has been tried in ART cycle. It works well. It needs frequent dosing at intervals of 3 to 4 days. However, particularly in the long down-regulated cycles, it will increase the incidence of hyperstimulation with an odds ratio of 3.6, which in this present day and age is unacceptable. HCG works on the corpus luteum, thereby further increasing the estradiol levels and further upsetting the estradiol progesterone ratios. And hence, many eye centers have given up the practice of giving HCG during the luteal phase. Now, when we look at progestogens, there are two major groups: the natural progestogens, which are found in nature and obtained from the plants, and the synthetic progestogens. There is a group in the synthetic progestogens which are called as retroprogesterones, of which the dydrogesterone, which is the new kid on the block, for luteal phase support is classified. The other synthetic progestogens, typically the 19-nor progesterones and the 19-nor testosterone derivatives, are not to be used in early pregnancy and luteal phase because of its estrogenic and androgenic effects. So when you look at the oral digogestrone versus the micronized vaginal progesterone, it is surprising to note that both of them are derived from the same plant, the yam product. However, the micronized form, which is the microparticles, makes it easily absorbable, and that is the advantage of the micronized vaginal progesterone. And digogestrone, because of a unique light therapy, gives it its retroprogesterone structure, which makes it easy or safe to give it orally, because when oral digogestrone is metabolized when given orally, it is metabolized into an active metabolite, more active than the parent product. However, when micronized vaginal progesterone is given orally, it passes to the first hepatic pass. It is metabolized into an inactive product and hence needs to be given at much higher doses than the vaginal or other non-oral routes, thereby increasing its side effects and taking away the advantage of it being given orally. When you look at the biological activities of various progestogens, we realize that digogestrone has progestogenic effect and virtually no estrogenic and androgenic effect. The micronized progesterone, in addition to its progestogenic effect, also has mild glucocorticoid effect and hence are to be avoided in women with previous history of impaired sugar tolerance. The rest of the progestogens, mainly the MPAs or the norepinephrine, are not to be given in the luteal phase and early pregnancy because of its estrogenic and androgenic effect. Now, micronized progesterone can be given by various different routes. As I said, the more common routes are the oral, the vaginal, the intramuscular, the intranasal, the rectal, the sublingual, and the transdermal routes. We know that the oral route has an advantage of it being most compliant, also very safe, very convenient for the patient, requires no special training of the patient, but it has its limitations. The absorption can be erratic. It has to go through the first pass metabolism where it is metabolized into an inactive product and can have drug to drug and food drug interaction. The intramuscular route is very good as far as its efficacy is concerned. The effect of the drug starts within 2 hours and peaks at 8 hours. However, the patient compliance is very poor because of its oil-based preparations, which are rather painful to the patient, can give allergic reactions and in some cases sterile abscesses. The vaginal progesterone has a better efficacy. The compliance of the patient can be questioned. Some of the patients are not happy to insert anything vaginally, perhaps sometimes because of their ethnicity and religious beliefs. It doesn't have any hepatic metabolism. It is rapidly absorbed and works best in the region where it is known to work. But in some women, it can cause a severe rash and allergic reactions around the vagina, and persistent discharge can be an irritant to the patient, and hence the patient compliance to vaginal progesterone can sometimes be low. The Cochrane data of 2011 had different progesterone regimens which were compared. They had over 32 studies which included over 9,800 women, and they compared the various different modes of progesterone use. Now, when you look at this part of the study, where there are 3 studies which compare the intramuscular versus the oral progesterone regime, we find that the intramuscular has much better effect and an ongoing pregnancy rate, an odds ratio of 1.9. But as I said before, the patient compliance is rather poor. The patient needs to go to a doctor every single day or to a nurse or a clinic for the injection, and that itself can be a logistic problem. When you look at the subgroup analysis where vaginal is compared with oral progesterone treatment, a comparison, a meta-analysis of over 6 studies with over 2,735 participants, they find that there is no evidence of any significant difference between the groups. However, our study of 2007 has shown that the oral dydrogesterone gave us slightly better ongoing pregnancy rates as compared to the micronized progesterone, but we had used 30 milligrams of dydrogesterone as compared to the standard use in other 2 trials of 20 milligrams. So when you look at the trials which have compared micronized vaginal versus dydrogesterone, the 3 main studies which come from India, the Chakravarti study of 2005, the Patki study of 2007, and the Ganesh study of 2011, all show that there is a slightly better efficacy in dydrogesterone group with an as compared to the micronized progesterone group. However, our study has used 30 milligrams against the 20 milligrams that is used in the other 2 studies. So the Cochrane data of 2011 concluded to say that there was a significant effect in favor of progesterone favoring the synthetic progesterone, that is dydrogesterone, over micronized progesterone for luteal phase support. Overall, addition of other substances like estrogen or HCG did not seem to improve the outcome. And the Cochrane data failed to show any evidence for any specific route or duration to be better. This review of the comparison between micronized and dydrogesterone said that the dydrogesterone gave slightly better success rate over micronized progesterone. The Cochrane data recommended that the progesterone supplementation should be started on the day of oocyte retrieval to up to the embryo transfer and should be continued in the first trimester, varying between 10 to 12 weeks of gestation. The different doses that were recommended was the intramuscular route with a dose of 50 to 100 milligrams per day, the vaginal micronized route of 600 to 800 milligrams per day, oral dydrogesterone varying between 20 to 30 milligrams per day, and the vaginal gel 8% containing 90 milligrams a day. As far as safety of progesterone was concerned, there wasn't much study done in ART cycles. However, 2 trials which used progesterone for threatened and recurrent miscarriages reported that the meta-analysis showed no statistical significant difference in the congenital abnormalities between the progesterone group and the control group. And then came the Lotus trial. The Lotus study had data from these 3 main studies where micronized progesterone was compared with dydrogesterone. These were 3 prospective investigator randomized controlled trials which had concluded that dydrogesterone was equally as effective or more effective than micronized vaginal progesterone for luteal support in IVF. In addition, the histological data also showed that oral dydrogesterone 20 milligrams daily was shown to have reduced endometrial development as compared with micronized vaginal progesterone 600 milligrams. And our study of 2007, where 30 milligrams of dydrogesterone was used, had statistically significant better ongoing pregnancy rates. Based on this study and the histological data and the empirical recommendations of several IVF specialists, the dose of 30 milligrams dydrogesterone daily was recommended for Lotus 1 and Lotus 2 study. Now, in the past, in any ART studies, we have seen that the number of patients recruited was much smaller, but the Lotus studies had combined together, Lotus 1 and Lotus 2 had over 2,000 patients which were inducted into the study and has been the largest study done in ART to date. Now, what is this Lotus 1 and Lotus 2 studies? These are a randomized, multi-center, multinational, prospective clinical trial program. The Lotus 1 is a double-blind, double-dummy study which compares oral dydrogesterone 30 milligrams given thrice in a day versus vaginal micronized progesterone 200 milligrams given 3 times vaginally. The Lotus 2 is an open label study because the patients, the doctors knew which was the active product given. In Lotus 1, there were over 1,031 patients. There were 974 embryo transfers, and Lotus 1 was conducted in 38 centers in 7 countries, basically in Europe, in Russia, and in Israel. The Lotus 2 was an open, multi-centered, randomized, controlled phase 3 trials, again having over 1,034 patients and 983 embryo transfers, conducted not only in Europe and Russia, but now extended into China, India, the Middle East, and the Far East, having 37 centers in 7 countries or regions. So both these studies had a large group of patients spread across the various ethnicities in the world. The patients were screened 40 days before the treatment started. It was immaterial what protocol was used in ART. The treatment was started from the day of oocyte retrieval when the patients were randomized to either Lotus 1 or the Lotus 2. In Lotus 1, which was started a year before, the patients were randomized to receive either oral dydrogesterone versus micronized vaginal pessaries. And in Lotus 2, which A year later, the patients were randomized to receive oral dydrogesterone versus 8% micronized gel daily. The treatment was continued till the pregnancy test, which was done with serum beta-HCG and a urine test. And if it was positive, the luteal phase was continued till 12 weeks of gestation. And at 8 weeks of gestation, a sonography was done to check for viability and also the gestation sat. The primary endpoint of the study was week 12, but the patients were continued under surveillance till delivery and a month after their delivery, when the neonates were also checked up for any congenital malformation. The inclusion criteria were women who were between the ages of 18 to 42, with a BMI between 18 and 30 kilograms per meter squared, with a history of infertility of more than 1 year, planning for IVF or ICSI, not pregnant, and normal transvaginal sonographies at screening, which means that patients of fibroids and endometriosis were excluded. The exclusion criteria were patients who were unsuccessful in more than 3 IVF attempts, or history of 3 spontaneous miscarriages, acute urogenital disease, allergies to progesterones, current or recent substance abuse including alcohol and tobacco, and any contraindication for pregnancy. So when you look at the results of the LOTUS-1 trial, where dydrogesterone is compared with micronized vaginal pessary, you find that the ongoing pregnancy rate is much better in the oral dydrogesterone group as compared to the micronized vaginal pessary, the difference in pregnancy rate being 4.7. When you look at the live birth rate, it is again seen to be much better in the oral dydrogesterone group as compared to the micronized vaginal pessary, the difference in the pregnancy rates being 4.9. This clearly shows that dydrogesterone gave us not only a better ongoing pregnancy rate, but a better live birth rate. And although this study was a non-inferiority study, it clearly shows that dydrogesterone is superior to micronized vaginal pessary as a luteal phase support. When you look at the results of LOTUS-2, where dydrogesterone is compared with vaginal gel, you again see that the dydrogesterone has a better ongoing pregnancy rate as compared with micronized vaginal pessary, difference in pregnancy rates being 3.7, and the live birth rate, again, the difference in pregnancy rates being 1.9. Again, this being a non-inferiority study clearly shows that dydrogesterone scores over vaginal gel as luteal phase support during IVF treatment. So when you combine both the LOTUS-1 and the LOTUS-2 studies and present it as a logistic regression analysis, you find that the odds ratio for oral dydrogesterone comparing to micronized vaginal pessaries is 1.32 as far as ongoing pregnancy rate is concerned, and as far as live birth rate is concerned, the odds ratio scoring dydrogesterone is 1.28. So when you combine both LOTUS-1 and LOTUS-2, you find that the oral dydrogesterone is associated with significantly better ongoing pregnancy rates and live birth rates per 1,000 women as compared with micronized progesterone. Now, what about the incidence of congenital, genetic, or familial disorders? There is no significant impact on the incidence of adverse effects or events associated with congenital, familial, or genetic disorders. 31 newborns had malformations in the oral dydrogesterone group and 13 in the micronized progesterone. Due to the low incidence of events, no significant impact could be detected for any of the factors. So both the Lotus 1 and the Lotus 2 were published in the Human Reproduction of 2017 and 2018, since they were conducted almost a year apart. And both Lotus 1 and Lotus 2 concluded to say that oral dydrogesterone was not inferior to micronized progesterone, and oral dydrogesterone had similar safety profile to micronized progesterone, and both studies showed similar rates of positive pregnancy tests, clinical pregnancies, live birth rates, and newborn assessments. And the implication of the Lotus 1 and Lotus 2 is the oral dydrogesterone is a good alternative to micronized vaginal progesterone as standard care for luteal support in IVF, owing to its ease of oral administration. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. Okay, so the questions that are asked is, would you recommend HCG for luteal support in the older group of patients as they are not likely to develop hyperstimulation? It's a very interesting concept because HCG was one of the drugs which was not in favor for luteal support because of its high incidence of hyperstimulation. However, there is a possibility that we could use it in the older patients for luteal support. But my only thing is that the HCG works through the corpus luteum, and in the elderly group, the corpus luteum itself could be compromised, and hence I am not very confident to say that in the older group, although the incidence of hyperstimulation could be reduced, whether we would have a good output of progesterone, because knowing that in the elderly group, the corpus luteum itself could be defective. The second question is, would you recommend having two formulations of progesterone, like two routes of administration, the oral and the vaginal? Frankly, this is something that a large number of infertility specialists are practicing. There are certain patients in whom the vaginal absorption of progesterone may not be very good, and only if you have actually measured the progesterone levels and found it to be extremely low would I recommend adding another route of progesterone. But scientifically as such, I do not see any advantage of giving two routes of administration of progesterone. The next question is, do you have any experience with the use of dufestrone in estrogen progesterone cycle with frozen thawed embryo cycles? Yes, now with the advent of vitrification, most infertility clinics all over the world have moved on to a large percentage of their patients undergoing FET cycles. FET cycles can be basically done in two ways. One is the natural cycle, in which a natural corpus luteum is produced, and the second is a cycle which is artificial cycle. Now, when we are seeing data which is coming from frozen embryo cycles, we find that the babies who are born with frozen embryos are larger in weight for gestation, and the mothers have high incidence of preeclampsia. Now, this is something which is not my studies. I have been in discussion with people in Europe who are doing some research studies, one of them being George Grissinger, who on a personal level has told me that the absence of normal corpus luteum itself may be one of the reasons why these women are developing preeclampsia. We do use dufeston in FET cycles, both in natural, in modified natural, and in down-regulated cycles. But in down-regulated cycles, particularly if we have down-regulated with a GnRH depot, instead of 30 milligrams of dufeston that we routinely use in fresh or other frozen embryo cycles, I increase the dufeston to 40 milligrams. I do not have any strong research paper to prove that this is better, but this is only because the cycles are down-regulated and to ensure that there is more than adequate progesterone available in the luteal phase. That would partly answer your question of are there any cases where you would give more than 30 milligrams? In most of our patients, in fresh cycles or in frozen embryo cycles where we do a modified natural cycle, we give 30 milligrams. But in the odd patient which is down-regulated with GnRH agonist, particularly patients who have severe PCOS, severely irregular periods, where they would not know or who do not get periods without taking any withdrawal treatment, we would like to increase the dose of dydrogesterone to 40 milligrams in such patients. Why do you think still physicians are using intramuscular progesterone against all RCTs and meta-analysis? I think infertility specialists do not like to change their winning formulas. So it is very difficult to change practice, and particularly in the US, I have seen that IVF specialists still resort to intramuscular progesterones, although a large group has moved on to subcutaneous progesterone use. I think non-availability of dydrogesterone could be another factor, particularly in some parts of US, in most parts of US and the UK, but IVF centers in Europe, in Middle East, in Asia and in Far East are now moving on towards oral dydrogesterone as a drug of choice in luteal support in IVF. The last question is, what is still the most used progesterone formulation in India, and is it related to cost? Till date, only 18% of IVF centers in India have moved on to dydrogesterone as luteal phase support. So a large majority of IVF centers still use micronized progesterone. The price difference between dydrogesterone and micronized progesterone is almost the same. There's a very little cost difference where dydrogesterone may be only 10 to 15% more expensive. But I do not think cost is the cause for patients, for doctors moving on. I think it is a mindset. It is to do with awareness. And I think as people get more aware and confident, they will move on to a route which has got a better patient compliance, which is the oral route. And in the oral route, the dydrogesterone scores over most other progesterones as luteal support in IVF treatment. I think these are the questions that have come to me.
Thank you very much, Amit. This was a very, very clear presentation, and I want to thank you for being with us today. So again, thank you very much for your time.
And to IVF Worldwide Seminars for all their logistic support. Thank you. You all stay safe and have a great day.